This is Dan Lenahan.
Yep, looks good.
Can I go ahead here?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, consider yourself in a water environment which is very dark. You can see perhaps the length of a person, but after about 6 feet, the rest of it is just kind of mysterious. And then there it is, the resting place for 1,000 men. This isn't just a sunken ship, believe me. This is the USS Arizona.
Almost invariably, people remember where they were, what they were doing when they first heard the terrible news about the disaster at Pearl Harbor.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
When they looked up, they thought, well, they're having some kind of drill this morning?
7:55. That's when the first bomb arrived.
They're not at their battle stations. They're helpless. And the Arizona was gone.
The attack on Pearl Harbor is so iconic, you'd think we knew everything there is to know by now.
But yet, still today, there are questions about it. What caused the Arizona to explode the way it did? What we discovered changed our understanding of Pearl Harbor forever.
I've been intrigued by the oceans from as early as I can remember. One of the things that really sort of steered me in my eventual direction was watching Jacques Cousteau and their submarine, the Sukuk. Came to Hawaii and I was driving around the island in 1976. And I was coming to the Mackay Pier and a crane was picking a little submersible out of the water. That was my dream. I had to go check it out. Just the idea of exploring the ocean, I'd always been intrigued by that. Pearl Harbor really was a defining moment for my parents and their entire generation of Americans. And yet, there's so much mystery about the attack, especially the use of Japanese secret underwater weapons. I always thought that this was an attack from the air, but the Japanese said that there was an attack from the sea, but with midget submarines. I was astounded. When I dug into it deeper, I discovered they were roughly the third the size of the smallest U.S. submarines. Perfect for the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor. The theory is that one of these midget subs made it all the way up to Battleship Row and torpedoed the battleship. Most of these submarines have been accounted for. It was proven that none had sunk any U.S. ships, but 2 had never been found. So was it possible that one of these hit a warship? It's fair to say I became a little obsessed with finding them. One in particular, a sub the crew of the American USS Ward claimed they'd sunk. Nobody really believed that they sank that sub, but I always thought that it was still out there. So I made an unofficial pact to try and find the Ward's midget. After 40 years of piloting submersibles, every time I climbed in and closed that hatch, it was the same rush, like the first time.
Working with Terry Kirby, he's such a fantastic guy. Even though I'm a biologist, like the shipwrecks are almost a side project or a hobby almost to help Terry out. Whenever Terry asked me to do a dive, I would jump immediately at the opportunity.
We started the search about 3 miles outside Pearl Harbor, not far from where the ward crew reported engaging the midget sub.
Okay, Pisces 5, you copy?
What is all this stuff?
I don't know what those things are.
Chasing targets with a sonar, you would get a target that looked very promising. There you're looking on your sonar, and there is a perfect straight line with a conning tower and a periscope.
Oh, okay. It's a big rock. Yeah, I see it now.
And then you'd go up to it and be the flat slab of a carbonate outcrop with a steel box on top with a pipe sticking out of it.
I guess I would describe it as an underwater dump. Vehicles, landing crafts, and ships that the Navy no longer needed. There are lawn chairs, toilets, old cars. So, yeah, if you're looking for specific objects, it can be quite challenging.
All right, there's that plane wheel we saw this morning.
We were at the end of the dive, and just getting ready to leave the bottom when I got another good contact out there.
I think this is probably one of our landing craft. We'll take a look at it. Whoa. What is this?
And I came up on what I thought was a torpedo. And as I got close...
It's a submarine.
It's a submarine.
I'll be damned.
Because of its small size, realized that it was the stern section of a Japanese midget submarine.
Wow. Now that's remarkable. The rest of the sub was missing. So where was it? Could this be the ward sub? Took us about a dozen dives over the next 10 years to find out for sure.
So there was another dive, and we went to the general area where I'd located the stern section.
What do we got here? See, let's check this out. It's a submarine.
This time, we were looking at the midsection, conning tower, periscope.
That's definitely a conning tower, over.
We went back out there again.
Now, look at the bow.
And I came across the bow section.
Got to be the third piece of the same vessel.
So here was all three pieces of a Japanese midget submarine.
So was this really the ward sub? If it was, why was it broken into pieces?
All three pieces were roughly within 100 meters of each other in a rough line. There were cables that were choked up and rigged on the tail. The midsection, you could see that it had been cleanly disconnected. And the bow section, it too had been disconnected. When I saw this, my feeling was that this was a war prize that was brought back to Pearl Harbor and investigated and then disassembled and rigged and dumped. The sub that the USS Ward fired on was never seen to blow up, so wherever it was, should still be intact. So our hearts sank and we realized that it wasn't the Ward's midget. Eventually, we realized that the method that we are using was going to take a long time. But we got a real break when our chief biologist, Chris Kelly, got access to a very expensive deep-sea mapping system.
Yeah, I took custody of a side-scan sonar. They render almost near photographic imagery of the seafloor. We were doing this mapping in the defensive sea area, identifying potential targets. One in particular was very, very interesting.
It was a perfect straight line, 80 feet long, with a little bump where there would be a conning tower.
Terry took a look at those images and he got very excited. He basically said, well, that's got to be it. The big question was he right? After so many years of looking for this mini-sub, Terry basically said, I want to have a shot at that target. Okay, your call, we'll go for it.
And once again, there was stuff all over the place.
Yeah, here's an airplane part.
And we couldn't believe what came out of the dark.
What do we got here?
What's that?
A submarine.
Oh my God, it is. The first thing I saw was the very distinctive figure-8 torpedo guard. Oh my God, that was it.
Yeah, Roger.
It's it, it's a midget sub. One of the major objectives was to try to find the 3.5-inch, 4-inch hole that would be evidence that the Ward destroyer actually hit the conning tower. The guys operating gun number 3 swore that they hit the conning tower.
There is a definite hole through the conning tower at the base of the conning tower.
There was that perfect hole right there, right where the Ward's crew said they hit it.
Gotta be the Ward midget, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was a very exciting day. That was like 10 years it took to finally find that sub. And it gave such closure to the Ward crew because it had never been confirmed.
Of course, is absolute elation. Then it suddenly dawns on you that the remains of the 2 Japanese sailors, the engineer and the pilot, were still inside of it.
I actually had the pictures of the crews, and I'm looking at these faces of these young sailors. That was pretty sobering for all of us. The 2 crew were still in there, were the first victims of the Pacific War.
Can we move down toward the bow and maybe document the torpedoes on the G?
The next question was whether this sub was responsible for sinking any U.S. ships.
It looks like, yeah, both torpedoes are in.
Yeah. Torpedoes?
Got the torpedoes.
They're in it? Wow.
The 2 torpedoes were still in the bow, so it was pretty obvious that it didn't sink any ship. With the Ward mini-sub found, there was just one more sub that was unaccounted for. We just started to wonder if we hadn't already found the 5th and final midget sub.
Re-examining the three-piece sub revealed a critical clue. The figure-8 torpedo guard, the Japanese confirmed, was unique to all the subs in Pearl Harbor. So this was definitely one of the 5 midget subs from the Pearl Harbor attack.
And this is pretty cool to see this whole thing to come together.
Looking inside, the torpedoes were missing. So had they fired on any U.S. ships, as the Japanese claimed? Records show there were several ships in the area, so someone must have seen something. Turns out they did.
So the USS St. Louis was a light cruiser, and during the attack was heading out to sea when they looked over, and here comes 2 torpedoes, hit the reef and detonated about 200 yards off their starboard side.
So the witnesses on the St. Louis account for these remaining 2 torpedoes.
I think the facts and the evidence are there that basically show where all those torpedoes ended up. The midget submarine could not have fired torpedoes at battleships in Pearl Harbor.
Finding the Japanese subs proved that they hadn't sunk any American warships. And just 3 years later, another team was tracking down a vital missing link about the Japanese attack from the air.
One of the planes that gave the Japanese the upper hand at Pearl Harbor was the legendary Zero fighter. At that time, the Japanese Zero was almost mythological. But why? Right over here, the blue panes of glass you can see are the original 1941 panes. And you can see the bullet damage through them from the attack. Me being the restoration director of the museum at the time, my quest was to try to find a Japanese aviation artifact that we could put in the museum. I started doing lots of research to try to find out what happened to all those wrecked Japanese Zeros.
Sid was able to locate what had happened to all but the one.
And that was the one that I remembered had landed on Niihau.
And from that, it was like a dog with a bone. He wasn't going to let it go until he tracked down where it was and what happened to it.
Probably the luckiest part of my life is to have a life partner that shares most of the same passions that I have.
I like research. I love digging and finding things. You know, the thrill is in the search sometimes, not the finding. Back in December of 1941, there were multiple newspaper articles about this Zero that crash landed. But it was sort of squashed after that.
Niihau is a private, isolated island close to Kauai. I kept trying to find ways to communicate with the owners of the island. Very difficult to get a hold of.
A lot of mystique was around it. It was called the Forbidden Island, and people had an idea that, of course, couldn't go there, strange things happened there.
For months, I kept trying to find out more information, either about the people that own Niihau or the airplane itself. And I'd find little dribs and drabs. By chance, I happened to run into an article about an electrical engineers conference that had been held. And one of the guest speakers had put on a special presentation, and it was about his visit to Niihau Island. And I went, wow, I need to find this guy. Called the number, left a message. we got the call from him. I said, by any chance, were you the fellow that gave the speech at the Electrical Engineers Conference? And he said, yep, I'm the one. And I said, you went to Niihau Island? And he said, yep. And I said, by any chance, do you know the owners of the island? And he said, Keith, yep, I know him. And I said, do you happen to have a way I could contact him? He said, I've got his phone number. And I said, great, will you give it to me? And he said, no.
Because the Robinson family had owned that island for almost 2 centuries, they are very private individuals. And if they don't like the cut of your jib, shall we say, you're not going to get anywhere.
Long story short, eventually we did contact Keith.
He drilled us pretty hard, and at the end of it, okay, obviously you're sincere and you're passionate about it, and I'm okay to help you. This is taking off from Kauai.
Way off in the distance there is Niihau, the Forbidden Island.
It was hard to know if we were going to find anything and whether we could get those artifacts out.
Pretty
Quite
rough country.
overgrown and rough.
And, you know, we're so used to being in Hawaii and seeing hotels and housing, and this island is completely void of anything. The airplane had been moved since the crash, and then later on it was moved to kind of the middle of the island, and that's where we first saw it.
This is the famous Niihau Zero, or what's left of it, which is actually some fairly significant parts.
Keith vaguely remembers playing in it when he was a kid.
Wait, let me see in there. Yeah. It was kind of like that. It was kind of, except that that's a lot darker. The stuff I knew was a lighter color than that.
And Keith remembers everything. The man has a mind like a trap. There's nothing escapes him.
This is right wing center section.
Collecting data, writing down all the coordinates, taking pictures. It was exciting to do that. I look at the videos and I can feel it all over again. You know, that excitement, that thrill of discovery.
There was a lot more to the wreckage than I first imagined.
It's a gold mine, absolute gold mine. It really was an inspiration to go, well, let's see what else we can find.
You can't get away from the feeling of history. Something big happened here.
I've often said that the T in KT stands for tenacious. Whether it's physically looking for it or digging it up underwater or on land or in the archives, I'm not going to let go until I find it, till I get the answer I'm looking for.
We found the plane that crashed. Now we wanted to know what had happened.
Finding the Holy Grail, the Rosetta Stone, shall we say, of this was finding the Mizuha report. So the Japanese plane came down near Howard Kanahano's house on Sunday, 7 December 1941, between 1 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The pilot, Nishikaichi, had sustained some damage while he was doing his strafing run, and was running out of fuel and was headed to Niihau. He was not under power, so he had one chance and one chance only to find a spot.
The question is, what happened to the pilot and the airplane? We'd like to learn a lot more about it. Unfortunately, the Niihauans who were alive at the time of the event in 1941 are no longer with us, and so we can't ask them now, so Keith is our best shot.
certainly never thought that we'd be able to come back here again.
It's still a fascinating place, and it has such a presence to it.
Watch out, there's 3 wires down here in the bushes, okay? Don't trip on them.
What do you remember of where the airplane actually came to a rest?
Okay.
Located.
Nishikaichi's final approach was from there.
Right.
He sees this and he thinks, aha, I've got a nice slope upwind and uphill. I'll land there. Hawila was in the house, okay? Hawila heard this horrendous racket outside. So he dashed out to the plane. The pilot, Nishikaichi, is just coming to. Hawila noticed that Nishikaichi had a pocket full of papers and his uniform. He ripped that off. The Japanese aviator threatened the people. We went on this reign of terror, and things went from there.
So it all started here.
After threatening to kill everybody on the island if he doesn't get his papers, the pilot runs into Ben Kanahele's wife and Ben and threatens her.
And Benny tried to take the pistol away from the pilot.
Kanahele shot 3 times.
The Hawaiians are pretty tough folks. All it seemed to do was enrage Benny.
He got so mad he picked up the Japanese pilot, threw him against a brick wall, and then his wife came over and hit the Japanese pilot in the head with a rock and killing him.
But that wasn't the whole story. A lot of the American authorities knew a lot about the Zero, but they didn't know enough to understand why it was as good as they thought it was.
The Army, came over and they wanted to look at the plane. Here is an example of the premier fighter from Japan, Zero.
The Army hoped to find out what made this fighter so good.
Investigating the Zero, a lot of the airplane's parts were made from an extremely light zinc aluminum alloy called extra super duralume. The aircraft was made even lighter by cutting holes into the actual internal airframe. The amount of weight was very small relative to the wing's lift, and that gave it immense maneuverability, particularly at slower and medium speeds. It made this airplane devastating in the Battle of Pearl Harbor. America's ability to get their hands on a nearly intact, rebuildable aircraft, that was a big deal. Parts of this very plane gave U.S. aircraft designers and engineers insights that could defeat the Japanese Zero and possibly change the course of the war. This Nihao Zero would have been a real find. It would have answered a lot of questions and perhaps saved American lives. For us, the Zero was but one factor of the advanced technology the Japanese displayed at Pearl Harbor. But to truly understand what happened, you must also investigate the destroyed ships lying in the harbor, and in particular, the Arizona. For decades, getting access was impossible.
As a young boy, I think the thing that had the most influence on me was my father, because he loved World War II pictures. When I told my folks that I was going to Hawaii seeking a permanent position at Pearl Harbor, they were wildly excited because my family, my mom and my grandfather and grandmother, they were there. On the morning of December 7th, my grandfather was just coming off work. That Sunday, he planned to be taking my mom and the rest of the family for a picnic out on the North Shore. Suddenly, the roar of aircraft came over their heads. All along Battleship Row, the attack was erupting. The Arizona's life is extinguished at 8:06. My grandfather was on the other side of that filmmaking, about a quarter mile away. I asked him if when it exploded, it must have been deafening. He says, no, it wasn't. It was a concussion that you could feel against your body. The casualties that occurred that day, nearly half of them are on the Arizona. 1,177 officers, sailors, and Marines died.
Nearly 1,000 were never recovered. The whole area was designated as a war grave. And so for many decades, no one was allowed to search the Arizona. But the question still remained, what exactly caused the disaster? It was thought to be a safe, protected harbor.
That professional curiosity led to connecting with Dan Linehan and Larry Nordby and all of those that were part of the Submerged Cultural Resource Unit that operated then out of New Mexico.
Some pretty obvious irony there to have a diving operation in the desert. We were asked to find out what sunk at the Arizona.
People didn't really understand fully what made it sink. Was it a torpedo or was it bombs? And that was unknown at the time we started doing our work.
Being real careful with placement of feet, fin movements, trying to keep your fins up away from the silt and staying out of...
We arrived at 83. It had been 40 years since anyone had at least openly dived that vessel.
We didn't know what was down there, what was left.
Finally, after all this time, we're going to find out.
Wow, this does take me back. It really hits your gut and heart when you're working on this ship. The USS Arizona, that's considered the holy site, you know.
The first time I saw it was a very powerful experience. I just wanted to think about what was on the other side of those bulkheads.
It's hard to imagine the force of such an explosion that led to such a terrible loss of life.
One has to understand that this ship generally had the shape of some wreckage, but no one knew it was down there. It was all twisted and turned around. The whole ship was kind of a puzzle. That suggested that this ship had to be completely mapped.
They were going to map the ship from stem to stern. In other words, bow to stern. I was asked if I wanted to help, and I said, absolutely.
No one had ever mapped a 600-foot battleship underwater. So therein came the problem.
We think of Pearl Harbor as sort of a pristine and water environment, but it's not. The visibility is low.
The whole idea that we had was to use cave diving reels to make a long, white, straight line. It sounds really, really crude, and it is, because that's the only real way to work where you can't see. And if you don't have a way of getting out, you're gonna die.
This is a 600-foot plus long vessel, up to 100 feet wide, and you're learning it 2 or 3 feet at a time, that's all.
and they would bring the drawing in. I would get it and then run it up to the National Park Service artist. It was great. The ship was now progressionally being put together like a mosaic. Not only was I understanding the history that way, I was part of it.
What we created was a detailed map of the entire ship, something never done before, hoping to reveal exactly what caused such a disaster.
For the American fleet, I think that they felt comfortable here because they were in shallow waters. Pearl Harbor's only 45 to 50 feet deep. And the technology was a torpedo couldn't do that at that time. They had no idea that the Japanese had actually found a solution to the shallow water torpedo problem. What I have here is a scale model. It's about 1/10 scale. This is the thing that made this torpedo capable of being dropped at Pearl Harbor, because when the torpedo is dropped into the water, these wooden fins break away. They have broken the fall of the torpedo, and now it runs at about 25 feet of water towards its target. The USS Utah was struck by 2 torpedoes, so we wanted to find out if they had also struck the USS Arizona.
We were looking for deformation on that port side of the ship. That's the side that the torpedoes would have come into. Deformation would be a rippling. It would ripple that metal.
When the Arizona was overhauled, they added a torpedo blister to the outside of the hull, which is designed for a torpedo to hit that and go off instead of hitting the hull directly. The torpedo blister is this double line along the edge of the hull on either side, and no damage was visible there.
We came up with nothing there, no damaged metal.
There just was no evidence of any torpedo hit on the Arizona.
We created an incredible map that brought us to the conclusion that it wasn't torpedoes that sunk the ship. It would take extraordinary leaps of technology, 30 years later, to fully understand what did happen to the Arizona.
As a kid growing up, our family talked a lot about the Arizona and the attack on Pearl Harbor. I'm certainly intrigued by history, and having the chance to work here, it's a pretty big honor.
To really understand what happened here, we need more than just ink drawings. We needed to see the detail inside and out. Divers can't enter the ship because it's a war grave. But by 2016, the technology was small enough for remotely operated vehicles to enter the interior of the Arizona.
We were hoping that all this high-tech equipment would lead to a more precise and better understanding of the ship.
We hope to inspect the condition of the ship and the full extent of the damage from the attack.
So this is me swimming the ROV over to one of the hatches near turret 4. You see these views of the ship that has rarely been seen by anybody, ever. And you can see that this is a table here, and that's actually a full light bulb. That's a desk, and to the right of it, you can see a sink. Look at this desk, and look at how preserved it is. It's been underwater for 80-some years.
But more than just inspecting the interior, we can now monitor the condition of the ship so we can better protect it for the future. So, we also scanned the exterior of the ship. The accuracy we get now from multi-beam sonar is jaw-dropping. This allows us to see the wreck of the Arizona in more detail than ever before. You can see the stern of the vessel is largely intact. There's not much damage at all. Close to barbette number 4, you can see damage to the deck where a bomb exploded. There's damage to the deck near the main mast, indicating a second bomb. And near the portside guns is further evidence of a third.
But as you go forward, you're in a blast zone. Everything has been decimated by this massive force. The ship has literally collapsed in on itself, 3 decks, pancaked down.
This certainly wasn't any ordinary bomb explosion.
To take out the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese developed a high-level bomb that was a formal naval shell to be an aerial bomb so that it could pierce the armored decks of the battleships. The bomb that will end her life goes down through the deck of the ship, in between gun turrets number 1 and 2, on that starboard side. It plunges down and then ignites the forward magazines. Some people think that was nearly a kiloton of energy. Those that saw it, like my grandfather, he thought nobody could live through that, and he was pretty much right. The amount of American servicemen killed on the Arizona is horrifying. People from all over the world that come here just to see where it happened, to experience that. When you go to the Circle of Remembrance, you see the enormity of it all. And you see those names arrayed across that marble, you're stunned. No one talks loudly. But they stare. They stare at that wall, and some of them seek to see a name that's similar to theirs. Perhaps wonder.